In this video, we will talk about two important things. One is the load test and the other one is the database test. Now, one of the important tests on any application, and especially web application, is the load test. Load test means how much users can your application sustain at a given moment of a time. Now, the good news is that, or I'll say the best part about the VSTS load test system is that you can virtually take up any test. In other words, you can take up a web test or a unit test or a recorded coded UI test, and you can generate load tests from that test, and then you can go and generate load on your application. In other words, let's say you can go and create a web test on your web application and then say, okay, now create a load test of 1,000 users and then generate load on your web application. So putting in simple words, what we are saying is that basically take up any test. For example, like take up a web test. Now a web test represents a single user. Okay. Now feed this web test to the load test and generate 100 user load, and then fire that 100 user request on your web application and do the testing. Now the VS 2010 load test and the VS 2008 load test both are virtually absolutely same. In other words, there is not big difference between the way you create load test in 2008 and the way you create load test in 2010. So thinking from the same angle, what we would request is that we are not going to go and re-record the load test for VS 2010. We would request you to go and see the load test for VS 2008, which is present in the VSTS section. In other words, log into Quest VD account and over there navigate to the VSTS unit testing and load testing Q&A section, and over there you can see that we have a nice link here saying how can we do load testing using VSTS test. Now this video is recorded by using 2008, but as we said that the steps are absolutely same like 2010, so you will not really feel a difference about it. So what we'll suggest is, for this VSTS 2010 load testing, please go and refer this video over here, which is recorded in VSTS 2008. Now let's go to the second part of the video, for which we do not have a video recorded. That is how to do database testing. Now, one of the important components in your application is the database. Now, your database, have quite a lot of logic. Like for example, it has stored procedures, it has functions, it has triggers, it has data which needs to be tested, right? So, you'd like to have a different kind of approach, when you're checking your databases or when you're testing your database logic. And over there, we have something called as the database unit test, right? So in order to test your logic of stored procedures, of functions, of triggers, you can use the database unit test to go and do the testing. So let's go ahead and create a very simple database unit test, and let's try to see that how we can see the results and how we can do the testing for the same. Now here we have a simple database here called as the customer database, and this customer database has a table called as tbl_customer. Now, in order to fetch record from this tbl_customer, we have a very simple stored procedure here. So if I go and browse the programmability folder, and if I scroll below, you can see that we have a very simple stored procedure here called as select all customers. So if you go and execute this stored procedure, it basically gives you some results here of some 3 or 4 records you can see on your screen. Now let's say that we want to go and create a very simple test, which goes and executes this stored procedure and says that do we at least find some records when we execute the stored procedure. So in other words, this test case will pass when we find some records in your TBL customers table, or when this select all customers stored procedure actually gives some records outside. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a simple database test which will actually go and execute this select all customers, and when it finds some records, in other words, if it finds rows more than 1, then it will actually give us saying that this test case has passed. So let's go ahead and start our Visual Studio 2010, and let's go and select a simple test project here. Let's go and create a simple test project here saying test database. So there's a project created. Let's go and delete this default unit test project which gets created. Let's go and delete this unit test file. So there's our test deleted. Now let's right click on the test database project and let's go and add a new test, and let's add the database unit test. Now the time you basically press OK, right, you'll be popped up saying that from where you want to do testing. In other words, what is the database location from which you want to go and test the stored procedures and triggers and functions, etc., right? So you can either go and create a new connection here and you can give your new location, or else currently I have an existing connection here which is created, that is the customer database connection. I'm going to go and select that. Okay, and I'm going to say okay. Now if you see, right, there are two sections which are visible currently on the screen of the database unit test. The first section is where you will go and write your scripts. In other words, you'll go and write your what you call your test, right? And the below section is nothing but basically where you'll go and see the conditions, what your database objects are giving back, and then say that they will pass or not, right? So in other words, in the first area, you will go and execute your stored procedures, functions, triggers, whatever it is, and in the below area, you will go and add test conditions to see that if your test case will pass or fail. So let's go and click on this create link, which I just did, and let's go and execute this stored procedure, execute select all customers. Okay, so in order to execute this stored procedure from your database unit test, you have to just say execute select all customer, select all customers. So it's nothing but it's the same syntax over here which we have. So the same syntax, you can go and type it over here. Okay, now once you have given the execution thing, the next thing is that after the execution, how will this test case pass? In other words, whatever data we get after firing select all customers, how do we check that data is valid or not? So now you can see that there is a plus sign here, and this plus sign here indicates that you can go and add test conditions on the data which we are getting from the select all customers stored procedure. Okay, so currently there is a test condition already added here that this test is inconclusive. Let me go and delete this test condition. Right, now let's go and add a test condition on the data which is going to be on the data which we are going to get back from select all customers. So let's say that we will say if the row count, so I'm going to go and add a condition of row count here, and I'm going to say that, let's click on properties, and we'll say that if the row count is 4 at this moment. Okay, currently if you see, right, our row count is 4. So if the row count is 4, right, then basically this test case passes. Okay, so I'm going to go and close this, and I'm going to go and save this. Okay, and now let's again go back to our test view, and let's execute this test. So let me go and click on refresh here so that the complete test compiles and we don't have any kind of errors. So everything compiled fine here. Now let's click on test view, and let's go and run this test case here. So run selection. So the test case is now running, and it should pass because we know that the number of rows currently are 4, so it passes. Now let me go and delete some rows from the table here. So let me go and open the TBL customer table. Let's go and edit the TBL customer table, and let's go and delete some records so that the value is not 4, and let's again go and rerun our database unit test. So let me go and delete some records here. So I'm going to go right click and delete some records. Oops, there looks to be some foreign key here with the addresses table. Let me just quickly go and just clean that up. So I'm going to go and delete all of this for now. Right, so now let's go and delete some records from the customer table. Right, and now let's go and run the test case. So let's again go back to our test view and say run selection. Now what will happen is definitely the test case will fail because you can see that it's now giving back 2 rows, and the expected number of rows are 4. So definitely this test case fails. So currently we just have 2 rows, and the expected condition, if you remember, right, which we had put in our assert was 4, right? So therefore this test case fails. Now you can see that there's one more property here called as the result set. Now sometimes what happens is sometimes you get data in such format. In other words, sometimes you get multiple sets or multiple record sets outside. In other words, let me just go and show you example here. For instance, now this stored procedure select all customers, it returns customers as well as, let's say, it returns addresses. Okay, let's say for now TBL underscore address. Okay, so in other words, now if you execute this stored procedure here, right, you will actually get 2 record sets. In other words, you can see that one record set is let me just go and execute this in a new query window here. So let me see here, execute select all customers. Now what will happen here is, basically you can see now we have two result sets here, right? Because we have two select statements in our stored procedure. So one select statement returns the customer table, and the other select statement actually returns the address table. So in case if you have more than two result set, then you will use this property here. So you can say that, okay, I have two result set, and basically each of those result sets will have this much row counts. So you can be flexible in terms of the row counts as well as the result set depending on conditions. Now let me go and revert back the select all customers thing, what I've done. Now definitely whatever I've shown here is very it's not something you will do practically, right? Most of the times what will happen is you will execute a stored procedure, okay, and then you will say that, okay, I want the exact snapshot of data. In other words, okay, I've executed this select all customers, and what I'm expecting is I'm expecting C1002 in the first row, Raju 0, PQR, and then the ID 1, and then C. So you want to match exactly the values of the data which is coming, rather than the number of rows. Okay, so any of these things changes, right, the test case should fail. So for that, we have a very wonderful test condition here called as the data checksum. Okay, so let me go and delete this the row count condition, and let's go and add a data checksum condition here, and let's click on plus, and let's go to the properties. Now if you go to the properties, you can see that there is something called as press to configure here. Click on this triple dots here, and over here let's go and retrieve the data. So let me go and select the connection, and let's go and retrieve the data here. Now what we'll say is that, okay, this test case passes basically when all of this thing comes as it is. So you can see that I've made a selection here. Okay, I've fired this stored procedure. You can fire a stored procedure. You can if you want, you can go and write a select statement here if you wish. So currently whatever data is coming over here, when I click on the retrieve, I'm going to go and select all of this data and say that whenever I get a complete snapshot of this data, then only then this complete test case passes. And now I'm going to go and press OK here. So let's go and execute this test we have created. So let's click on test view, and let's click on refresh here. And let's go and run this selection. So it has passed now. Now let's go and edit some rows of that table, and let's change some values. Okay, so let me go to my TBL customers table, TBL customer table. Let's edit some rows here, and let's go and change some values in the table. So let me make this C100003 as Shiv here. So I've changed some values now. So now what should happen is that test case should fail. Okay, so that's the value changed. Now let's go back to our test viewer, and let's go and run the selection here. Okay, now once we run the selection, now definitely the data has changed, the data map has changed, or there is some changes to the data which has happened. And now you can see over here it's saying that the checksum is not matching. In other words, the expected and the actuals are not matching, and this test case has failed. Okay, so you can really go and have huge flexibility in terms of what kind of data you are expecting by using the data checksum. Now remember, one point here very important is that you don't need to go and select all the data. In other words, sometimes if you want to go and create a data checksum on just on a single column, you can do like this. Or sometimes you want to go and select data on two different columns, something like this. Like for example, if something changes in the first row and the first column, and something changes in the second row and the second column, then only this test case fails. So even you can go and do selections which are flexible and create a new data checksum. Okay, so really there's a huge kind of flexibility in terms of using the test condition of data checksum. Now there are other test conditions here you can see, and I'm not going to cover them at this moment in this class because these two things are more than enough. But you can see there are some other test conditions. If you wish, you can use them, like the scalar value. In other words, if your stored procedure is using is returning back a single output or a single return variable, you can use the scalar value. If you want to go and check the schema, you can use the expected schema here. If you want to go and check that what is the execution time your stored procedure is taking, you can use that. So there are lots of test conditions here, and you can go through them later on, or probably you can go through them when you are using them in your projects. Right, so I hope that you have enjoyed this complete tutorial here. So in this tutorial, what we did is we tried to cover two things. One is we talked about the load test, and we said that basically for load test, please go and refer the VSTS 2008 load testing video, which is absolutely same for 2010 as well. And the second, we looked into database testing, where we saw that how we can go and test stored procedures by using row count, by using result set, and by using the data checksum. So I hope that you enjoyed the video. In the next video, we will talk about one more, it's not a test actually, but one more kind of test called as the order testing. Thank you very much.